What's good, party people? This is Accordion Woods, and I have the honor and privilege of talking to somebody that on Instagram she is over the moon salt, but I might know her as Kaycee. But Kaycee is an amazing cosplayer, basically doing justice to many of my and wrestling Hall of Famers legacies justice. Kaycee, what's going on?
Not much. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm ready to talk wrestling and cosplays.
Yeah, man, that's kind of your jam, which I want to figure out. Like, how did you kind of link the two? Because I know wrestling can be to some people a very niche market, right? And then you kind of have your groups and your cliques and whatever, and you got people that cheer the heels or boo the faces, and vice versa, and what have you. But like, first off, like, how did you kind of get into pro wrestling?
Oh, how did I get into pro wrestling is kind of a funny story. I peruse Netflix all the time trying to find something to watch like during my lunch break, and I found the show Glow, and it's about women wrestling. And I started watching it, and I finished the series like in a week, and that actually initiated like my interest. I was like, I want to know more about like actual wrestling or the story behind Glow. So I watched the documentary about Glow, and then I started watching Dark Side of the Ring. And so I really started more so with like the documentaries about wrestling before I even watched like actual live wrestling. Like, so it was it was a really weird start and introduction to it, but that's really what got me obsessed was the show Glow.
I don't think that's so bad, because I mean, first off, in we got to remember how big and monumental that time period was, especially for women's wrestling, because you had Glow on Netflix, which was a rehashing, and a dramatization of the 1980s era, literally like promotion and TV show of the same name, right? But
Mm-hmm.
then also at the same time, you had the Bellas and doing Total Bellas, Total Divas with the rest of the divas,
Yeah.
right? And that, to me, because when people were like, "Oh, why are the Bella twins going into the Hall of Fame?" Well, I think in 2020 hindsight, I think they have just as much. Um, I don't know, reasoning for people joining, and especially women, females, basically taking into wrestling where that hadn't been before, than like dudes and Hulk Hogan of a different era.
Oh, no, exactly. I mean, it was like me coming from not having any prior knowledge about wrestling. It totally immersed me in the whole concept of the gimmicks and the heels and the baby faces. Like it was a nice little like 101 about wrestling for someone who's never watched a match in their entire life. I know the name Hulk Hogan. I knew the name Macho Man, but I had never watched wrestling as a child. I didn't have much exposure to it at all. So it was interesting to come at it from that perspective, and I think that's actually really grown my appreciation for wrestling because I went at it from the a different angle than just going right into watching like Raw or SmackDown or AEW.
No, 100%. And it's fun because like that is when you're talking about like if you watch a normal Raw or SmackDown or any particular show, especially WWE, it's not something that is easy to digest, right? If you have absolutely no knowledge, then maybe a handful of names over the course of history, the Rock, the John
Mm-hmm.
Cena's, the Stone Cold Steve Austin and Hulk Hogan's, right? So to kind of have those kind of documentarian, aspects of it. I mean, I don't think there could be like a better like, oh, the training wheels are off, and here's what this thing is.
No, definitely. Well, and then going from Glow and then the documentary and then going into Dark Side of the Ring, it was just like another where it's like, okay, I'm not looking at matches, I'm not watching them wrestling, I'm seeing these people as human beings and some of the stuff that they went through, or some of the things that were happening earlier on as wrestling was, starting to gain popularity, like some of the crazy stuff and stories. And so that was another really big like introduction into the world of wrestling from a different angle. And again, it had me appreciating how these people put their lives on the line for entertainment, for entertaining the masses, and some of the craziness that they had to deal with, behind the scenes. So yeah, it was crazy.
No, 100%. Now, I will give you a cool little tidbit. I think it was season one of Glow. I want to say episode 3 or 4, where they were campaigning. The wrestlers were campaigning like we want to wrestle, and
Yep.
that was actually filmed right outside of my apartment.
Was it really? Oh,
Yeah, you could actually see the numbers in the gray building. That is actually right outside of where I'm filming this right now.
that's so
Yeah,
cool. I know. I like hearing the little trivia about Glow. Like I've rewatched this series like multiple times. Like the first episode, John Hennigan's in it, and like
yeah.
he's my favorite wrestler. Like so, it's just cool getting those little like trivial knowledge when you go
No,
back and rewatch it.
well, see, the thing that pains me the most is like I was at work and my wife was like, "Oh my gosh, there's like wrestlers outside," and I was like, "What?" It's like, "Yeah, there's cameras," and I was like, "What?" Like, yeah, and I was trying to get out of work. I was,
You're like, I
oh,
have an emergency.
I got a pain in my chest, like I'm brave and all that.
Oh my god.
Yeah, and they by the time I got here, it was all over. It was all over. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know.
Curse
Curse
work.
work. Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. Um, so I mean, in terms of the dark side of the ring, do you have a favorite like episode of that, or the most intriguing? Not being a wrestling fan.
Ooh. Well, I mean, the Chris Benoit, the 2-part was, it was rough, but I mean, it was good. The Bruiser Brody was definitely another crazy one. And then of course the very first one with Macho Man, like he became instantaneously my favorite wrestler, even though I know he has his demons, he has his issues, but Randy Savage as a person, like I relate to him just because he seemed like he was very particular. He was a perfectionist. He
Mm.
wanted to do things a certain way and make sure he knew exactly how the match was going to go. I was like, that like encapsulates me as a person. Like I am very structured when I do my cosplays. I want like all the little details to be exact. So I related to him on a personal level, and then he's just amazing. I love Randy Savage. He's my favorite wrestler.
I, if not for Bret Hart versus Randy Savage, Saturday night's main event in 1987, right? Yeah. I don't think I would be doing anything in combat sports because, like, at the time we were living in San Francisco, right,
Mm-hmm.
in the city, and I was a wee young lad.
Oh,
It was my parents, and we lived in a Victorian apartment, right? And they would see me watch like Mighty Mouse and Superman and whatever, and we were like, "Oh no, like." He's impressionable. He's probably gonna try and jump out the dang window and try to fly. And we were like 2, 3 stories up and what have you. So that wasn't it. But then when I got to wrestling, right,
mm-hmm.
and there was those characters in real life, right, that I didn't have to jump out of anything, and that hooked me in. And if you watch that match back, it is they talk about like greatest matches, especially during the current era,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I, I will put that match up against probably anything because the story that was told, and I don't want to. I mean, I'll give it a little bit of away. I mean, it's been 30 plus years, so if you're not on it,
There's no spoiler. Exactly.
no
There's no
spoilers.
spoilers at this point. Yeah.
But essentially, it was like Brett was still part of the Hart Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Jim the Anvil Hart, Jimmy Hart, and I think even like Danny Davis, who was the evil referee, right? Kind of like went in, and it was just Savage and Liz, and Savage was still a face,
Mm-hmm.
and essentially they work over much, and it goes like 3 segments, right? Because it was on NBC, right, in place
Mm-hmm.
of SNL. It goes 3 segments. Like we're in this thing a full like almost 20 minutes for that era. It was amazing, but essentially they work over Savage's leg,
Mm-hmm.
and he ends up taking off his boot, and when Brett goes for the boot, small package, the most dangerous move in pro wrestling, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's a one booted Randy Savage rolling Brett off with all of these like mitigating circumstances that try to take the victory away from Macho Man Randy Savage. He raises above and gets helped to the back by Liz. And I just, for wrestling in terms of storytelling, again, that's somebody like that doesn't have a whole lot of knowledge, product knowledge beforehand, and you drop them in and go like, oh, you get a pain in your leg. You get these guys are assholes, and what have you, and then yes, good does triumph over evil. Like that's it.
Well, and even the relationship between Liz and Macho Man. I mean, like that's a storyline you might not hold up now, but it's like back then, like it's just that romance, that story. Like that's I was like, I love them. Like I loved Liz. They had a very it was turmoil. It wasn't the best relationship, but storyline wise, I mean, like that constant back and forth. They're together. They're not like it's just some yeah, that's why I liked that Dark Side of the Ring episode. It was really like going into their relationship and
Oh yeah.
the turmoil that they and the struggles that they were having, and the jealousy that was brought out, having his wife there around other wrestlers. I mean, it was kind of played out in real time, out there with the matches as well. So it's like stuff going on backstage, and then you're seeing it kind of play out as well. So it was good. Yeah.
No, 100%. And our good brother Joe Panther Jr. from the Dudes at Ringside podcast, like, hey, bud, what's going on, Joe? Yeah,
Hello.
hey, Joe. No, but you know what's funny? Savage was right about Hulk
Oh,
Hogan
well, yeah,
and Lynn.
exactly.
He was completely right.
All true.
So all the things that anybody wants to talk about Savage about, whatever, go and look in the closets of the Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan. All right, and then come back to me. And guess what? If that is the barometer, then damn it, Randy Savage needs to be declared a saint.
No, exactly.
Right. Just saying. So after kind of getting into Glow and then Dark Side of the Ring, like what did you do to kind of almost get more into this newfound kind of respect of pro wrestling? Did you start watching WWE or?
Yeah, I started watching WWE. So like I said, I started about 2019 watching Glow, and then come into early 2020, I started watching, I don't even think I was watching Raw or SmackDown. I think Royal Rumble. Like I just went into that pay-per-view, which is, it was in Texas. Edge returned and all that stuff. And so it was just a really big one. And it was one of the last live events before the pandemic hit.
Right.
So, getting to see the crowd reactions and everything. So I was like, oh my God, like this is a big deal. Like people are really like into this. And so I was like, I want to be into that. So it was a really weird time because that was my first introduction into live wrestling. And then the pandemic hit. And so I started watching, AEW and SmackDown and Raw with like literally nobody in, they're doing it in this quiet little studio, no reactions. And that was what I was watching. It was a constant for me, but it was definitely different than what I'm watching now. Watching wrestling during the pandemic is definitely different than watching it with an actual audience. So yeah, that was my first introduction to live wrestling, was the Royal Rumble 2020.
Which, I mean, obviously 2020 WrestleMania is a 2-night pandemic mania, right? And obviously you did have the context of that year's Royal Rumble, right? So you kind of knew what wrestling looked like, but it was still new to you. So how did you kind of whether critique or dig that mania? Was it different? Did you know there was going to be a difference?
I mean, I knew there was going to be a difference because I knew there was going to be like pre-recorded segments. I knew that there wasn't going to be crowd reactions, like watching McIntyre win the championship, and like there he is, like talking to the camera, and nobody's cheering. Like it was sad because you wanted him to have that big moment that I was seeing at Royal Rumble, where he won, and then it's like he's winning the actual championship, and there's dead silence. It was interesting, but I enjoyed it. I liked it. It was just very different.
Do you have a favorite? I mean, were you more night 1, night 2 of that pandemic? It might as well be pandemic mania.
Yeah, it was just pandemic. Well, was the first one a 2-night? Oh, it was a 2-night, right? Because they had the Firefly Funhouse, and then the other one was the Undertaker, I think, right?
Actually, it was other way around. It was Saturday night was the Boneyard, Boneyard, AJ Styles, and yeah, AJ Styles and Taker, right?
Yeah,
And
that was
then
great.
yeah, 100%. And that meme of like you Taker kind of shooting up, and then
I love
AJ
it.
Styles, yeah,
I
like
use it
that's
all the time.
I, I mean that's the greatest, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it was I guess I mean both nights were great. I think probably the first one then that was the one with Undertaker. I think that was really well done.
Hmm.
And I think it brought a different perspective. Was the Edge and Orton one the second night
I want to say no.
or was
You
it the
know what?
first night?
It could have been the first night, but then you know what? There's been so much,
It's so
right?
much. That's why I'm like I'm trying to remember it because I was like that was one of the matches where I was like, "Oh man, this is taking forever." And
Yeah,
without those crowd reactions,
right.
it lost the momentum. Like halfway
Hmm.
through the 45-minute match, I was like, "Okay, I'm done."
And then like the audacity to kind of call it like the greatest wrestling match ever. And I was like, first off, you guys are sports entertainment. You guys,
Mhm.
Vince, you've told us sports entertainment. We're not pro wrestlers. Don't We're superstars. They're not pro wrestlers, right? And then you want to have a greatest wrestling match. And then I kind of went into it because there was actually a tag team of Shelton Benjamin and Charlie Haas called the world's greatest tag team, and they
Oh,
were the heaters for Kurt Angle. They were Team Angle back in like I'd say the mid 2000s.
okay.
That's This is like when this is the era of like that, Brock and
Oh,
Kurt
okay.
Angle at Mania, where Brock does the moonsault and damn near jacks his head up and everything like that. Jesus, this is a huge hunk of meat floating through the air. This is
That's a
weird.
great way to describe him. A
I
huge
mean,
piece
is it not like
I mean,
this?
no, that's a perfect description. That's what I said. I was like, "That's spot on."
Yeah, and the fact that like he's hit it before, but then like he was like, oh yeah, 20 minutes in the match, and I'm all sweaty. Kurt's all sweaty. Whatever. It's a good idea. And just later, right? I got a little bit of context because Impact Wrestling had a house show when my son was young, and I was like, oh, I'll take the wife and kid and whatever, right? And that house show, it was actually Samoa Joe and Kurt Angle on
Oh,
first because Kurt had to go like it was in Bakersfield, which is like Central California. So he basically flew into LAX, drove 2 hours, wrestled in the first match, and then came back and then flew to New York to be on Howard Stern the next morning,
that's wild.
right? So he was. So we have a main event match with Kurt Angle and Samoa Joe, and that was like a very hot angle at the time, right? Pardon the pun, angle. But and Kurt, is going back to, he wins going back to the dressing room, and I kind of race, and it was a small venue. It was like maybe 2,500 people,
Oh,
right?
wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I kind of raced to the guard rail with my then maybe 1 year old son, like under my arm and whatever, and he decides he wants to touch Kurt Angle, right? Kurt Angle was so sweaty to the extent my son Owen slaps Kurt Angle and this almost like Paul Bear esque face.
Oh, you're
Ooh, and then he looks at his hand and he looks at me and he's like, ah. Yeah, it was just full of sweat. It was like rain. It just happened right on his little
oh my.
hand. Yeah,
Poor thing.
absolutely. So imagine both of those two. If that's Kurt, think
Mhm.
about Brock, and then 20 minutes into the match, and then one, yeah, just, yeah, that's,
Sweat City. Yep.
so it's Sweat City. Oh, that needs to be a t shirt. You know that, right?
Really?
I'm just saying. I mean, they have what every time Brock Lesnar comes to town, right? They have the Suplex City, bitch, like, and wherever you are,
Mhm.
you're like, oh, it's a Cowboys theme one. If you're in Dallas, that needs to happen. A
Yes.
Sweat City.
Sweat City sounds
I'm just saying. I'm just saying. So, what did you think of the Bray Wyatt John Cena match? Because there was a lot of like wrestling nuances of,
Mhm.
the heel turn to NWO, the almost the lighting and the setting of old like 80s style Saturday night's main event, wrestling challenge deal. How for somebody that was kind of new to the product, like how did it go over with you without having some of those nuances?
Yeah, exactly. Like for me, like I didn't understand a lot of it until, a couple months into my, watching wrestling and going back and being like, "Oh, I get it." Well, and the same actually going back to Edge and Orton, Edge, when he returned at Royal Rumble, like everybody was super excited. Me being brand new to it, I was like, I don't know who this guy is. He must be important. Like, and I think after, I want to say it was after either night one or night two, they did that 24 on Edge about his
Right.
return. And so I got to watch that and I was like, holy crap. Like, that's why it was such a big deal that he returned, seeing his struggle and the surgeries and everything he had to do and how long it had been since he had come back. It wasn't until, I saw that documentary that I understood what happened at Royal Rumble a few months back. So
Yeah.
with the John Cena and the Firefly Funhouse match, like I didn't understand a lot or get a lot of those references until, now looking back and saying, oh, okay, I understand it. I see where this is coming from. So it's been a learning experience for me, for sure. Like I'm learning as I go. I still consider myself like a little baby pro wrestling fan because like there's still so much I have no clue about, but I'm having fun learning about it.
No, absolutely. And wrestling at its best, it's fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
Until it's not fun. When you get like, oh, I'm an AEW fan. Oh, fuck
Uh,
WWE. I'm a WWE fan. Fuck AEW. That's where it
mm-hmm.
doesn't get fun, right?
Yeah.
But like, it's just like you dig the thing you like, cool, whatever. Not everybody's gonna like it. People will like it, whatever. And even wrestling as a whole is such a niche kind of audience anyway that like even if you are on the right side of the track, so to speak, in terms of your opinion and how you basically partake in wrestling, you're still a leaper to like 90% of the pop culture lexicon.
Exactly. You're still gonna get people going like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about, man. I was like, okay. I know, like I have at work, like my coworkers all know me now as the wrestling fan, and I have one coworker who like she was a Steve Austin fan like back in the day, and that's it. Like so. If we talk wrestling, she'll just ask questions about like Stone Cold. Like, like she's trying to like relate to me and try to, she understands it a little bit, but everybody else is like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. So
No, but that's cool. That that's a way that you two, as coworkers, kind of getting through your workday, kind of get to break bread is through wrestling.
oh yeah, for sure. So we'll still send each other like little wrestling memes, and she'll get it. And some my other coworker brought up like Shawn Michaels one time. So like they have small memories, or they know a little bit about wrestling, but it's still like you can't really carry on a full conversation. But then here you and I are, and I'm like, I am not at the same level of wrestling knowledge as you. So it's definitely comes at levels. So I'm down here still, very much so.
You know what? We welcome you still, your
Yay.
coworkers as well. Wrestling should be a place of great refuge from the rest of the world.
Yes.
Which Husky 518 says, Firefly Funhouse and Boneyard were one of the most interesting cinematic matches I would assume of all time. Absolutely, but you know what? Speaking of cinematic matches, did you or have you yet gotten to any of the broken Matt Hardy stuff?
No, I have not. So see, my timeline of watching wrestling has been okay, documentaries, golden era, a little bit of attitude, and then like straight into like trying to keep up with the current. So like I still have not touched like the aggression or like like even a lot of the added later attitude era stuff, the undisputed era. Like there's a whole like chunk of wrestling that I have not been exposed to or just know like tiny little nuggets of knowledge about it. So yeah, there's still so much.
But that's that again. Nobody, and you say like, oh, to me, there's a gentleman named George Ramosa. He runs the Wrestling Chatter channel on YouTube,
Oh wow.
and he used to be on AfterBuzz with like Lillian Garcia. I think he produced Lillian Garcia's podcast for a time, along with Christy Olsen, and that guy, he can tell you dates. Like there was one time where we went with like Victoria, right, and we had her
Oh, okay.
on, and he basically detailed the year-long feud between Victoria and Trish Stratus, but date by date, house show, televised, whatever, what was being said in the Meltzer news sheets, and I was just like, "What in the hell?" And then he's messaging me, he's like, "Say something." I was like, "You're
Yeah.
doing it." I got nothing. Like the one little tidbit that I had
Mm-hmm.
8 minutes ago. You said,
Oh man, I lost
ah,
my moment. It's gone.
yeah, it's gone. It's gone, you know. So, but I definitely appreciate it. But again, there's levels to this stuff. Even I am a complete novice in some things. So, which going in, as you're getting into it a little bit more, right? Away from the dark side of the rings, the
Yeah.
glows, and what have you. Like, as you're going back, are there any performers? I mean, not named Macho Man, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you appreciate that much more in terms of just whether it be the presentation. And that's one thing that I think is missing in a lot of, specifically WWE,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where there's not a lot of context, right? Like the
Yeah.
first time I saw Roman Reigns with this bulletproof vest, and it's supposed to be a bulletproof vest. Somebody punches him in the stomach and he goes, "Oh," and I'm like, you couldn't do that to.
Consistency.
Hell, even the Mountie, the Mountie back in the day, like you would, like if he prod you with that damn stick, and then that was it, lights out, it's over, it's over. Undertaker puts you in the body bag, it's over, right? And when there's little nuances that get missed, like it can be hard for today's era of WWE, right? I think AEW does a lot better of it, New Japan as well. And I don't want to be like, oh, New Japan is better than everything, but sometimes it is. But who are you getting a lot more appreciation for in terms of like the stars of the past?
Ooh, stars of the past. I mean, so whenever I cosplay somebody, I try to do my research. So I've cosplayed several, legends. Dusty Rhodes was one of the very, very first ones. I sat there and sewed all the polka dots. But before I even started the cosplay, I went and watched like every documentary, a bunch of different matches, and just seeing him and the where he came from, and how he came up, and then now his sons are a part of the wrestling legacy. So definitely had a lot of appreciation for him. Roddy Piper, I mean, his story and seeing everything, and just how he's just this rough and tumble. Yeah, like, yeah, he's
There you go.
definitely, yeah, that was my first one. Sat there and
Yes.
sewed all 26 dots. Thank God.
Wow.
Yeah. During the pandemic, I mean, there was nothing else to do. So I was like, I'm gonna sit here, watch wrestling, and sew, sew it. And then of course with Undertaker, um, watching his whole series. What was the name of his series that they did?
The last
The
ride.
the last ride. I gained a lot of appreciation for him wrestling through all those injuries that he had. So every wrestler, Mick Foley is one of my all-time favorites. And he is the sweetest person in all of wrestling. Like, I absolutely love him, and I got to meet him this year, so that was like bucket list. Um,
Yeah.
but his story too, reading his autobiography, and seeing all the stuff that he went through and how much love he has for wrestling, even with all the shit that he went through. He still is just a prominent voice in the wrestling community, and he's always trying to support the young wrestling community, and he's amazing. I know. And he sang me happy birthday.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, really?
Yeah, yeah. So he was definitely such a joy to meet and to get to thank him. I was just like, thank you for always being just like a constant positive in the wrestling community. He's like, I try. But yeah, he's definitely one that I respect and appreciate everything that he sacrificed, just for entertainment.
No, 100%. Which I mean, Husky 518 says, "Yep, that last ride was a good docu
It
series."
was so good.
Absolutely. I mean, to me, it was because right around the same era, maybe a little bit before, everybody was talking about the Michael Jordan, the Last Dance
Oh
documentary,
yeah.
and
Hmm.
and to me, that was as good as pro wrestling got to that level, and the care and consideration that was. That was something that again you might have heard the name the Undertaker or what have you, but you drop back on that deal, fire up the Peacock Network and whatever, and through the course of the episodes, you got an appreciation, and also, you know, somebody like that's a guy who kept it in character for
Oh,
so many years.
exactly. It humanized him. And it also showed a lot about his wife too, Michelle McCool. Like, I
Yeah,
mean, I didn't even know who she was. I was like, oh, she's a wrestler too. Oh my
yeah,
God. So seeing them both through the series and just really seeing that, yeah, he's a human being and he was struggling to just wrestle, to go complete a match, and he's constantly chasing the perfect match. And yeah, that was heartbreaking to see him like, I can do another one. It's like, stop,
yeah.
please.
Yeah.
Um,
It's funny because, like, for me, it's so weird, right? I think even before the last ride happened, he did the Broken Skull sessions with Stone
mhm.
Cold, right? And again, for damn near 30 years, I had been listening to him, rest in peace. And honest to goodness, like, I am not entirely convinced, as like a husband, a father, what have you, that if I don't shut off all lights in my damn house, that I will hear a dong in the shrill of Paul Bear. Ooh, and then fucking,
Yes.
yeah. So I mean, I'm getting fucking goosebumps as I'm saying that. Like, I love wrestling, but every time I heard the dong, I would run to the fucking bathroom, right? And my mom and dad are like, "Yeah, you're not scared of the Undertaker. It's wrestling, right?" And I was like, "No, I'm not." But I wouldn't actually. It wasn't until like the WWE Network and maybe some YouTube videos that I actually watched the Undertaker wrestler, because like that during that time period, because that time period was like fucking weird. And especially there was a SummerSlam in Chicago where there was an Undertaker versus Undertaker.
Oh yeah.
Yes. And I'm like, there's two, one's not enough. What the hell?
True. And they look
Yeah,
very simple. They did a good job.
100%. And one, speaking of, bringing it all together, one controlled by Paul Bear, and then one, a legend that you've cosplayed as, and one of our favorites, yours and mine. But the Million Dollar Man, Ted DiBiase, is,
Yes.
the corporatization Undertaker.
Oh man. Well, and Ted DiBiase, going back to like their stories and stuff, his story. I watching his documentary, The Price of Fame, like, oh, like seeing his redemption story and what he was going through with his family and his spouse and everything, and then seeing him come back. And I loved his tie-in with Cameron Grimes earlier this year. Like,
Yes.
oh, it was so good to just see him come back and that laugh. So yeah, he's definitely one that I grew to appreciate. Like, I loved him as a heel, but then watching his documentary and seeing his backstory and how he tried to live that gimmick, and it just completely like shit on his world and like,
Yeah.
and having to come back from that, and now still being able to kind of balance that gimmick with his, newfound religion and
Yeah.
everything. It's been interesting.
It is. It is, especially when there's been some embezzlement charges levied against good Ted, good Ted.
Yeah.
So it's a weird one. Which I mean, that's you gotta check out his stuff in Mid South.
Oh.
Yeah, so this is pre WWE. Mid South was actually Jim Ross actually starts in Mid South. He started his
Oh.
pro wrestling career. It was in like Oklahoma into Louisiana. Back in the territory days
Oh
before
yeah. Mhm.
Vince, pretty much owned everything, right? And
Mhm.
he wore this glove. It was a coal miner's glove, and instead of like the $1 million dream sleeper hold that he would put on people, and of all the MMA things I do, you lock somebody on $1 million dream. That is a legit move. You go night night. It's just go night night. But like he basically built the stories around this $1 million. I mean, not $1 million, but the coal glove.
The
Where if
glove.
he
Wow.
hit you with the coal glove, you went out. It was almost like brass knucks and just working
That's
away.
wild.
It's a different style than you see shades of the $1 million Man, the
Mhm.
precursor or what have you, but like it's something almost completely different than the $1 Million Man, and he was still a top draw for that kind of like
That territory.
southwestern territory. Yeah,
Yeah. Wow. I'll have to check that out for sure. I know one of the things that helped me and I should probably reread it. It's like my textbook was the comic book or the illustrated history of pro wrestling, and that whole graphic novel was like my little like textbook, and I would read it and everything, and it broke down the territories and the different styles of wrestling and some of the matches, and it was that was definitely one that got me kind of interested in learning more as well. So it's like maybe I need to go refresh.
Refresh,
Like
yeah.
it's been a while since I read it.
No, 100%. And Husky says, I bet there are a lot of people thinking to themselves if they were high or on drugs by seeing two Undertakers. 100%. 100%. I mean, I was a young lad, so that wasn't even in the mode of operation. But I get what you're saying, bro. I
Well,
get it.
my husband watched wrestling as a kid, and I remember him. Yeah, and so it's funny because he was really into wrestling during that late golden era, going
Yeah.
into Attitude. And he used to tell me, like, he was like, I was terrified of Undertaker. He's like, Undertaker, like, as a kid, he was like, I hated it. Anytime he heard it, anytime he came on screen, he was like, I was legit terrified of Undertaker. And then the voice of Paul Bearer and everything. Um, so he was really into wrestling as a kid. And then once I started getting into wrestling, he had kind of dropped off and had stopped watching. But now both of us have like gotten into, yeah, exactly, we watch together, we share little like we follow all these wrestling Instagram pages, so we're sharing wrestling memes or little tidbits or stories that we hear. So it's kind of renewed his interest and kind of kept us both kind of communicating about that, so it's been fun.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Now, our good friend from Australia, Mick Mac, our friend from the After 83 Weeks podcast with Eric Bischoff, he says, Adam loves Virgil.
uh
Do you notice?
Virgil
Yeah.
from Money
He,
Inc.
he hit on my mom.
What? Well, he seems like the type.
No, so back in so I didn't know what indie wrestling was or whatever, and we were living in Vegas. Like we bounced around a lot, like the Bay, Fiji, Indiana, Georgia, New Mexico, all these places, right? But we were in Vegas, right? And I see a flyer because my dad was gambling at this off the strip, Vegas casino, right? And it kind of reminds me if you've ever seen like Vegas Vacation, the
Oh, mm-hmm.
okay, you remember like the casino that cousin Eddie brings Clark to, like the pick of the hand and whatever, tic tac toe. It was very much that. It was very JoJo, like jobber status, what have you. And I saw a bunch of like wrestlers, and I was like, Dad, wrestling. And I mean, we had like the Iron Sheik, Junkyard Dog, Jim the Anvil Neidhart. Guess what? Before ECW got it, I actually saw on that card was a very young Rob Van Dam versus Jerry Lynn, which that would go on to almost like be the center place of ECW. I'd say maybe 3 years later, but I saw it just, without the weapons.
So cool.
Right. So, but before the match starts or whatever, the card starts, there's the gimmick table, everybody's selling their wares. I was like, oh my God, Virgil, for a person of color. Well, like there weren't too many. It was like Virgil, Junkyard Dog. And I had already got Junkyard Dog's autograph in Polaroid, so let's go with Virgil, right? And it's my dad, my sister, right? And then I get pushed to the front and whatever, and I was kind of scared and timid, so my mom takes me out of the hand. Okay, go. She's Fijian, right? British coming about that. Okay, AJ, let's go, and whatever. And Virgil, before I'm like handing him the paper to sign and the pen, and he's just like, would you like to be my valet? And looking over at my mom.
You're like, excuse me.
I was 8. Fuck me up. And my mom antagonized my dad with it. Like, oh, you won't take me out to dinner, will you? Okay. I'm going to go valet for Virgil.
She had it. It's
fucking
like, save it for later.
Heel. That was heel shit, though. Thank God. And so fuck Virgil. Which,
oh man.
Yeah, man. And then it could have got the free meat sauce. You know about Virgil and the meat sauce, right?
I know the relation. He doesn't even have a video game with it too. It's like, I just have no clue the context of
Well, he puts
meat
over
sauce.
he puts over fucking Olive Garden because like they have the the limitless
Oh
breadsticks
yeah.
and
Hmm.
whatever the hell, and he's enamored with this fucking pasta with meat sauce, which is kind of like
I
almost
mean,
every
Olive
pasta,
Garden, it's not terrible.
especially when they put like like they put yeah, fuck Olive Garden for being like pushers, right? Because like they put the bottle of wine and you're like, and if you don't know, whatever,
Hey, but
right?
when you're there, you're family.
Yeah, right. But family doesn't charge you if you fucking take one too many to the vino. God damn it.
uh,
Yeah.
uh,
But apparently, Virgil loves their meat sauce, which is an inside joke, and I won't whatever because I've already talked too much shit about Virgil. But yeah, I mean, there's a thing. Um, Now, into like as of right now, because obviously, greatest wrestler of all time and all that, like that gets muddled, and I think there should be a recency bias clause where, like, your top five, your top 10, whatever, 5 years from now could absolutely change,
oh
right?
yeah.
So, with that all being said, in terms of eras, as you're kind of going back, what is your favorite era of wrestling as of right now?
Mm. And it's funny on my Instagram, I had asked people to ask me questions, and somebody did ask that, like, "Oh, what's your favorite era?" And I sat there for a while because I was like, like I loved the pageantry of golden era. Like I loved their gimmicks and how back then like you believed that person was that way. So I do miss that, like that mystery and that kayfabe kind of era of golden that came with golden era. But I want to say the current, just because I'm most familiar with, but also the progression of female wrestling,
Yeah,
where it's come from. They're not just valets or escorts, are just these pieces of you know
eye
oh,
candy.
she's
Yeah.
gorgeous. Yeah, exactly, pieces of eye candy or wrestling in their bras and panties. Like they're legitimately considered athletes. And I think that's why this current era is my favorite, just in terms of female wrestling. I think that it's come so far, and it's just great to see that it's going to continue to progress and get better.
No, 1000%, 1000%. So, I mean, we went favorite eras, right? But
Hmm.
obviously, they're all your baby, right?
Oh,
But uh, in the realm of cosplaying, like, what has been your favorite wrestler to cosplay as thus far?
ooh, I mean, and I guess it just depends on the day, because like in terms of what I've actually, because some cosplays I just put together, like I don't actually build any part of it. They're just things that I've carefully curated to create the cosplay. So for example, like Eddie Guerrero was one of my favorite ones that I did. And
Yeah,
the only thing I made was the boots. Like I painted the boots. But the shirt I bought, the leggings I bought, the wig I bought and cut. But that was one of my favorite ones because it was just amazing to see the positive response and people sharing stories about how Eddie was such a big impact to them, and just hearing everybody's positive reaction to that. So that was one of my favorites. Even though I didn't really make much of it. Yes. So just seeing like, it was just fun to see people really really enjoy it and just be like, oh man, Eddie was just such a great icon and he's a legend. Nobody can really say anything bad about Eddie Guerrero. He's amazing. So that was definitely one of my favorites. But actually building, I would say, was my Jake the Snake. uh,
ooh,
because I did watch I watched several documentaries about him, and I watched the Beyond the Mat documentary, and his story is so sad. But the Diamond Dallas Page documentary about his helping him redeem himself.
yeah, the
I had
resurrection.
exactly just seeing Jake the Snake come back, just making those pants and getting to sew those. Like I designed the pattern, I got the fabrics, I hand stitched that cobra onto those
Wow.
pants. So that's all something I did freehand. Um, and that was definitely probably my favorite and the hardest one to do because that fabric was awful.
Yeah, and I mean, it was almost like a sack, right? Like, and if you go back to Jake's, tights of that era too, they're not. they're not comfortable. Yeah, I remember like I think it was Ric Flair that was saying about Luthez when Luthez was like kind of on the board of WCW, and Luthez was a great wrestler during the 50s, in the 50s, right?
Mm-hmm.
World champion in the 50s. And, wool, like Lou wanting to go to like wool tights, right?
Oh.
And I almost felt like that he's talking about Jake. Like Jake is
Mm-hmm.
wearing wool tights almost because they're always clunky, especially like the green ones or
Yep.
the gray one that I think it was one of the manias where it was either gray or white. And he almost has like a Medusa's head esque
Oh
deal
yeah.
on it. Yeah, and it almost looked like the much maligned Shawn Michaels. There was when Shawn Michaels comes back,
The brown ones.
the shit brown, like that's Jake's. I mean, they
Yeah.
must have the same tight making person because like
A
it was
gear
almost the
maker.
same.
Yep.
It's almost the same.
Well, and that's why, like, doing those older ones, I have an appreciation for gear makers back then. Like, watching the documentary about the Macho Man's designer and how, like, or even Ric Flair's, like, hand doing all the little crystals and
Mhm.
hand stitching. Like back then, you had to do the stuff by hand in order to get it to look a certain way. Now we have with technology and the tools that we have now, like gear can be made a lot quicker. Patterns and designs can be made a lot quicker. Back then, it was like, okay, you want a snake? All right, we're gonna, hand stitch this onto your gear. So it's showing an appreciation for gear makers back then too.
Which I gotta ask, in your opinion, I mean, thus far, who do you? I mean, what are some of your favorite gear?
Ooh. Well, Macho Man, obviously, like any
Yes.
era of Macho Man, like he had the most colorful, recognizable, memorable like gears. Like you see like anytime you tune into a Raw or a SmackDown or a pay per view, there's at least one person sporting the full Macho Man gear, like at least one. So his gear is definitely my favorite. Ultimate Warrior had some pretty cool stuff. I know he's kind of problematic, but I was like, but his gear was cool. The fringe and everything. And now I would say Bianca Belair. The fact that she makes her own gear
Yeah.
is just like it blows my mind. Like even yesterday, she came out with the full like butterfly, and she had the little butterflies in her hair. I was like, she sat there and was like, I'm gonna make myself some butterfly gear. So the fact that she's doing that for herself, and even I know she's made gear for her husband too,
Mhm.
for Street Profits, like that's amazing. The fact that she's just this incredible wrestler and she's sitting there making gear that's custom and fits her so beautifully. Like, yeah. So her gear is definitely probably like my favorite.
No, 100%, 100%. For me, I mean, like, of course, Mach is amazing, and like, of course, everybody wants to go with like the iconic, the WWF run, right? But
Mm-hmm.
how he reinvents himself in the latter part of WCW, where he slicks his hair back and he's got that macho,
The lightning, yes. The
yeah,
madness, yes.
yes, that gear is so underrated, like
Yep.
so underrated,
The
and how
lightning bolts that go from the glasses into the
glasses,
bandana, like,
yes,
mm-hmm.
oh man, and even the because I'm not he didn't wear the weight lifting belt too much in WWF,
No.
but he had almost like Hogan, but he had like a madness black
Yep.
weight belt, and to me, like the visual of like, oh man, he's got this weightlifting belts, those things are pretty thick, so when he hits the elbow drop, oh man, he's like compressing his spine and like it made it a little bit more real, like
Yep.
just the presentation, and it's so funny that the gear can add to
The
uh,
character.
the character,
Yep.
right? And the physical ramification of their choice of attire, right?
Exactly. No, that's such a great way of looking at it. And that's why I enjoy cosplaying, because it's allowing me to appreciate and pay homage to wrestlers in a different perspective. It's like people recognize these cosplays because they're like a set moment in time. They remember a certain WrestleMania, they remember a certain match. And that's why I try to do a lot of research when I do cosplays to make sure that they are accurate, because, the internet's mean and they will be quick to point out an error or a flaw, or hey, that's not correct. And so, being so new, I want to make sure that, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it correctly, or I'm going to make sure that there's no room for anybody to be like, that's wrong, that's wrong.
Which, I mean, speaking of that era of match, I mean, I can't believe I didn't even think about it. But I mean, the "Be a Man" album.
Oh, yes.
Yes,
His
you
rap
hit it.
his
Yes.
his rap album, I know people talk shit about it, but it's like he like stepped out of his comfort zone,
Yeah.
and like the videos of him like practicing and trying to learn, like he wanted to make sure when he made his rap album it was going to be good. And I love it. I still have it on my like workout playlist. Like I have Feel the Madness and Be a Man like on there.
Well, I mean, it was infinitely better than Hulk Hogan's wrestling boot band. That
Mm.
that was one that I got from the 99-cent store, and I thought, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like a hit album and whatever. And I think one of the songs, obviously, it starts off with the Hogan WCW theme. He's American man. Almost sounded like Paul Bear. I swear to God. And then, but there was this one. It was like, I want to be a Hulkamaniac to hang out with my family and friends. And Hulk actually tries to rap on this one. And I'm sitting in Inglewood, California, in the late '90s, early 2000s, where people, you had to watch out for what you wore, because you could have got shot if you didn't wear the right color. Right, exactly. And then like they're bumping Tupac and Biggie, and I got fucking Hulk Hogan, and
You're
I
like,
wanted,
don't.
yeah, judge me on tape too. Yeah, it's fucking. Oh,
Oh my god.
oh, yeah. So I mean, in terms of your husband, right? Because he is actually coming back. You've resurrected his love and appreciation for wrestling. Is there a cosplay that you've done or have yet to do that he's like, maybe, hun, like, you do this one?
Oh, I mean, I know Ultimate Warrior is his favorite as a kid. Again, he's problematic, but as a kid, like he was always my favorite. He was just wild. And so he's like, if you did one of the WrestleMania looks of Ultimate Warrior, it'd be kind of cool. I think I could pull off one of them, like the one where he has his airbrush jacket or something. I was like, that
Yeah.
would be something kind of cool. Um, or Andre the Giant would be fun to do,
Oh,
because that's one of
yes.
his favorites as well. So maybe a little tribute to Andre would be fun.
I think it's great. You were speaking of the wrestling revolution, and I think, of course, this is one of the greatest eras for women's wrestling. But there's Alundra Blaze or Medusa gets a lot of love, especially from the WWE, from AEW and NWA. Right? They had the Empower pay per view, and Medusa was there. But one of the people that I just like, I watched her back, and I almost, fuck, man, like, she was here and I didn't appreciate her in that time, and that is the one and the only Sensational Sherry, which you have done masterfully right here.
Oh,
That's,
I love
yes.
her. I
She,
know. Well, and she's one that I want to go back and try to really do like full on sensational share, because this one I just
Mhm.
kind of did the makeup style.
It's
Um,
pretty fucking good though.
Thank you.
Which, and again, it kind of brings everything together, right? Because theoretically, if you came into Glow, I mean, for that era, she was almost Glow for the WWF, right? And
Hmm.
but I mean, you watch her matches in AWA, where she was a former women's champion, and she's beating the shit out of girls.
Oh yeah, I mean, even when she was just the manager escort, she was taking those wicked bumps from like like the male wrestlers. Like, I mean, she was legitimate, but yeah, she was just kind of like, okay, this is your spot. Like, stand there, hold the mirror, take off his shoes or his jacket. But you're right; she's definitely an underappreciated part of the women's wrestling movement, and I definitely wanted to try to find another way to pay tribute to her soon.
No, I mean, if anything, if I had the DeLorean and and they're like, which woman's wrestler of the past do you want to bring to, and it's not just the WWE, you've got fierce females out in Scotland. I mean, and Renegade, the brand new Renegade Wrestling. You've got Shine and Shimmer here in the States of all female wrestling promotions where, they're packing 1,200 plus seat, arenas with just women's wrestling, not a male in sight, and it's just like I would go, grab Doc Brown and Marty McFly, and I'm like, you bring Sherry back, you motherfuckers. Like
So she
that's,
can see exactly.
and I mean, her in her prime. Let's I would love to get her right before she's introduced to like drugs and whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where she's right in her prime or whatever. Snatch her and then bring her here and then just run her like. Nothing against Trish, nothing against Diana, nothing against Becky, Sasha, and what have you. But Sherry will beat the brakes, and I mean, in terms of her character, her promos, she was the total package.
Yeah, she was intense. Like when you watch some of her, I'm like, oh my god, like the energy, like she's just like you feel it, like you can just
Hmm.
feel it watching them. And she just did such a great job, even in whatever role that she was having to play. Like she's like, okay, this is what I have to do. I'm gonna act the shit out of this, you know.
Yeah,
And so you just naturally draws attention. So yeah, it would be great to bring her into this era because I think she would be very much appreciated.
no, 100%. But speaking of appreciation, Casey, obviously you have done so much in such a little bit of time in terms of showing your a complete and utter appreciation for wrestling. But obviously, you can't get here without a throng of supporters, both social media and in real life. So take as long as you need. Let's get some shout outs out of the way.
Oh, shout outs. My goodness. Well, I mean, I've had several of my Instagram followers purchase purchase pieces for me because cosplay is expensive. So I've had to definitely be a little more conscious with what I buy, so I can see if maybe I can utilize it for another wrestler in the future. So I've had several supporters and followers, but the wrestling community has just been so welcoming this entire time, just inviting me into it and just kind of embracing what I do. Because what if you look at it from an outsider's perspective, it's kind of strange. But the fact that the wrestling community has really been so nice and welcoming and supportive to everything that I've put out, and just so appreciated. There's too many to count. um, and so yeah, I'm very grateful for all the opportunities and continued support from the people who follow.
I think that's absolutely brilliant. And doing some fantasy booking is Husky saying that if Sherry was alive today, I feel she would have a role with Adam Pierce, which
Oh,
that'd
kind of
be
like
great.
Sonia.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be a good angle
Who's
for
gonna
her.
fucking fuck with Sherry Martel? No one.
No one.
No one. I don't care if it's young Sherry or I mean Sherry that would probably be at this particular stage of the game, probably what in her 60s or whatever. Like
Hmm.
she was, she's still that enigmatic personality. So that's excellent booking, Husky.
Yeah.
I like it. I like it. Uh, but it's obviously, you're such a likable person,
Oh, thank
and
you.
and you do such great justice to the pro wrestling community and legends of the past and even present. But for those who want to follow you on the socials, where can they do that?
You can follow me on Instagram at Over the Moon Salt. I'm also on TikTok for Over the Moon Salt. And on Twitter, I'm OT Moon Salt because it was too long of a name, so I had to shorten it.
No, that's amazing. And yeah, Twitter does that. I'm Adam K Woods, and not according to what's on Twitter. It's all weird, but you put in one thing, you'll get the other. Whatever. But
Exactly.
you are absolutely brilliant. And again, just thank you for paying homage to such wrestling greats, both past and present. Because there are people that might not watch pro wrestling at all. They might just be into cosplaying, and they might be Star Wars cosplayers or whatever the case may be, Disney cosplayers. And you throwing up that hashtag or whatever, you're bringing Disney folk and Star Wars folk and other cosplayers of different genres back here to pro wrestling, and maybe electing their love that had been dormant of pro wrestling, or maybe sparking a new love, just like it has been for you in the last couple of years. So I thank you for it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and that's one of my favorite things. I'll get the occasional DM, and they'll be like, "Hey, like I used to watch wrestling as a kid," or it'll start that conversation, and it's just so fun when people share their wrestling story or how they connect to wrestling, because it just allows me to see how other people appreciate what I love. So it's really great when I cosplay something or someone, and they reach out and they're like, "Hey, like that reminded me that I used to love this," and it kind of brings it back full circle. So yeah, I really like it.
Uh, well, we really like you, and we really like you guys. And thank you for joining us here at According to Woods. And if you haven't already done so, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe to the According to Woods podcast on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. Kaycee, you're subscribed to the podcast, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Dang right. So go ahead and be like Kaycee. It'd be awesome. And go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Follow her on all the socials because it'll just brighten up your day. But speaking of things that'll brighten up your day, if you don't believe me, you don't believe Kaycee, and subscribing to the podcast, well, here's a pro wrestler named Zeta Zang, and she'll convince you.
Hey, this is